Hey all, in our second video of Unit 2, we're going to be looking at unemployment. More specifically, we're going to define unemployment, we're going to learn how to calculate the unemployment rate, we're going to look at the different types of unemployment, and last we're going to end with something called the natural rate of unemployment. We're going to explain why we don't necessarily want 0% unemployment. All right, let's go. So unemployment. And so our definition of unemployment is just workers that are actively looking for a job but are not working, right? And so that actively looking component of this definition is really key. If you are not actively looking for a job, you are not considered to be unemployed, right? So you have to A, be actively searching for a job, and B, you can't be working, right? Because if you were working, right, then you would consider to be employed and not unemployed. The second definition that you guys need to know, or the second term that you guys need to know before we get into anything else, is the unemployment rates. And the unemployment rate is just a percentage of people in the labor force who want a job but are not working, right? So in other words, the unemployment rate at the end of the day is just a percentage of people who are unemployed, right? And so here, this brings us to our first equation. So one of the big things you're going to need to be able to do on the AP exam is to be able to calculate the unemployment rate. And so how we calculate the unemployment rate is through this equation. The number of people unemployed divided by the number of people in the labor force. And then in the next slide, we'll get to what the labor force actually entails, right? And then we're going to multiply it all by 100 to get us to that percentage. So yet again, our equation for the unemployment rate is just going to be the number of unemployed divided by the number in the labor force times 100. And so in that equation, right, we talked about this idea of a labor force. And so who exactly is in the labor force? Well, there are four characteristics, or there's four real groups of people that are considered to be in the labor force. And you have to satisfy really all four of these characteristics here. One, you have to be at least 16 years old. You have to be at least 16. So that's a pretty cut and dry characteristic there. Number two, you have to be both able and willing to work. You can't just be willing and not able, or not able and willing. You have to be both able and willing, right, to be considered to be part of the labor force here. You can't be institutionalized, meaning that you can't be in jails or sick in a hospital full time. And you also cannot be in the military, in school full time, or retired, right? So in other words, if you're in the military, you are considered to not be a part of the labor force. If you are in school full time, you are considered to not be a part of the labor force. If you're retired, you're considered to not be a part of the labor force, right? And so, like I said, to be considered a part of the labor force, you have to meet all four of these requirements here. And so before we move on, what I want you guys to do is just to really quickly pause the video and decide if the following individuals in this column are employed, unemployed, or doesn't count towards our labor force here. All right, so just a nice little sort of check for understanding. All right, so if you guys can pause the video now, and then in about a minute, we'll come back and we'll go over it together. All right, so let's go over this. So the first one, your retired grandpa. So remember, if you're retired, you do not count towards the labor force, so you just don't count, or DC. Number two, you're a 16-year-old high school student who applied to work. So you're 16 years old, you're more than likely willing and able to work if you're applying to work, and so even though you're a student in this scenario, you are considered to be unemployed, right? Because you are at least 16 and you are willing and able to work here, even though you are a student full-time. The third one, a 16-year-old high school student who quit work for sports. So yet again, you're 16, you're still a high school student, but you are not willing to work, right? Because you quit your job, right, in order to play high school sports full time. So in this scenario, you do not count towards the labor force. Number four, single mom looking for a second job, right? You are considered to be employed, right? That keyword is that second job, right? So if you're a single mom looking for a second job, you are assuming that the single mother already has a first job. And if you're already working, you are considered to be employed, even though you are looking for a second job there. Number 5, a college student who works part-time at a grocery store. Well, even though if you're working part-time, you still have a job, so you're considered to be employed. Number 6, a prisoner. Prisoner, you don't count towards the labor force, right? Because you're institutionalized. And lastly, teacher that doesn't work during the summer, right? The teacher's still employed. It's not like the teacher loses their job, right, over summer vacation. So that teacher is still employed. All right. So I hope you got all those right. If you didn't, just review the first part of this video to make sure that you really understand who is considered to be employed, unemployed, and who does not count towards the labor force. All right, so moving on. And so when we talk about unemployment, right, there are really 3 different types of unemployment. We have frictional, structural, and cyclical unemployment. And really for the next chunk of our video, we're going to go over each one of these different types of unemployment. And so the first one is frictional unemployment. And so frictional unemployment is just temporary unemployment, or this idea of being in between jobs. And so we are going to say that frictional unemployment is a good type of unemployment, right? Whenever we hear the word unemployed or unemployment, we have this very negative connotation that we associate with it. However, right, there are some types of unemployment that are actually pretty good. And one of these types is frictional unemployment. Right? We are always going to have frictional unemployment within our country. We are always going to have people that are in between jobs. And part of the reason why frictional unemployment is considered to be good unemployment is that at the end of the day, these individuals are qualified workers with transferable skills, meaning, right, that they can easily jump from industry to industry, right, because their skills are transferable from industry to industry here. Right? And so if you are a college student, right, looking to gain your first job, you are considered to be frictionally unemployed, right? There are always going to be college students that are looking for that first job out of college, right? If your mom and dad quits their job and looks for a better job, they're considered to be frictionally unemployed. Right? And so yet again, right, we're always going to have these people that are in between jobs here. And so a very specific type of frictional unemployment is seasonal unemployment. And seasonal unemployment is just mainly due to the time of year and the nature of the job, you are going to be unemployed. So think of mall Santas, right? No one in June or in the summer months is clamoring to hire a mall Santa. And so because of that, during the summer months, right, and in the late stages of winter and spring, mall Santas are seasonally unemployed. The second type of unemployment is structural unemployment. Structural unemployment is just changes in the labor force that make some skills obsolete. In other words, because society is progressing, certain jobs within certain industries are obsolete, like they just go away. And so these workers do not have transferable skills, and these jobs never come back. So if these workers want to gain employment somewhere else, they're going to have to learn new skills to get a job. For example, if you are a DVD repairman, you are considered to be structurally unemployed, right? Because with the rise of streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, right, no one uses or buys DVDs and DVD players anymore. And so because technology and society has progressed to the point where we don't really use DVDs anymore, if you are a DVD repair technician, you are considered to be structurally unemployed because that skill no longer is in need within society. The same can be true of like milk delivery men in the 60s and 50s. And so a specific type of structural unemployment is technological unemployment, right? It's where automation and machinery just replaces the workers there. Right? That there are no need for factory jobs because machines can do the same job as humans. And so our last type of unemployment is cyclical unemployment. And this is probably the worst type of unemployment. This is the bad type of unemployment here. And so cyclical unemployment is just unemployment, caused by a recession. So in other words, right, the jobs aren't obsolete. People aren't really in between jobs. People are laid off and are unemployed because of a downturn in our economy, because of a recession. And so here, right, the next couple bullet points on the screen is just sort of describing why there's unemployment and recession, right? Whenever there's a recession, people lose their jobs, which means demand for goods and services fall. When companies aren't forced to produce more stuff because demand falls, demand for labor falls and workers are laid off, which in other words is called demand deficient unemployment, right? People are being laid off, people are unemployed, right? Because there is no longer the same demand for the original good and service. And so with unemployment, right, there's something called the natural rate of unemployment. Because we discussed with our three different types, structural, frictional, and also cyclical, right, that there's always going to be certain types of unemployment within our nation, right? There's always going to be frictional unemployment. And so what the natural rate of unemployment tells us, right, is just what the acceptable amount of unemployment is when the economy is healthy and growing. And so we can get to our natural rate of unemployment by just adding together the frictional plus our structural unemployment. Right? So yet again, if we add together our frictional unemployment plus our structural unemployment, we should get to our natural rate of unemployment there. Right? So for example, right, if our frictional unemployment is 3% and our structural unemployment is 2%, then our natural rate of unemployment is 5%. Right? So pretty simple. And so here, when there is no cyclical unemployment, right? When there is no cyclical unemployment, we're going to say that is full employment output. In other words, we're going to say we are at real GDP. We are at potential GDP when there's only frictional and structural unemployment. And so for the United States, right, we are at full employment when we're at 4 to 6% unemployment, right? Notice we're not at full employment when we have 0% unemployment or 0% unemployment, right? We're at full employment when there's 4 to 6, because that 4 to 6% takes into account that there are people that are going to be frictionally unemployed or people that are going to be in between jobs, right? And people who don't have jobs because society has progressed and that industry is obsolete. Right? And so at the end of the day, right, we are going to say our economy is doing well. Our economy is doing great if there's only frictional and structural unemployment. And if there's cyclical unemployment, right, then we're in a recession, so we can say our economy is not doing as hot, right? Our economy is not doing well. And so here, right, this seems sort of backwards to a lot of students and a lot of people, right? Isn't 0 to 3% unemployment a good thing, right? Isn't everyone having a job a good thing? Well, yes, right? If we're looking at it, yes, we want everyone to have a job. However, if there is too little unemployment, if everyone has a job, theoretically, that can cause prices to rise since consumers are going to spend more and more and more. And then there's going to be a bidding war for all these resources by the producers, by these companies, that is going to drive up the prices of all these goods. So in other words, if we have too little unemployment, theoretically, that is going to cause inflation. And so that's why in the United States, our natural rate of unemployment is going to be around, right, 4 to 6%. And that natural rate of unemployment is going to differ from country to country, right? Solely dependent, right, on the different types of unemployment benefits that country offers, right? So the natural rate of unemployment for Germany is not 4 to 6%, right? It's mainly about like 10 to 12% for countries like France and Germany. And so what are some of the criticisms of our natural rate of unemployment, or criticisms of just the unemployment rate at large? Well, here, right, we're going to say overall, the unemployment rate shouldn't really be taken as gospel, right? Because it can misdiagnose the actual unemployment rate because of these three reasons. One, discourage workers. If you're looking for a job forever and ever and ever and you just give up, You are no longer willing to work, so you're not considered to be part of the labor force, and therefore you're not considered to be part of the unemployment rate. Right? So that unemployment rate percentage, right, can be skewed when people just sort of give up, right, and no longer look for a job. Number two, underemployed workers, right? You are considered employed if you have a part-time job. But if you're looking for more employment, you aren't double counted, right? You are still considered to be employed, right? So if you're a part-time worker and you want to be made into a full-time worker, or you just apply to other places because you need more money, right? You're still considered to be employed. And lastly, our unemployment rate does not take into account, right, the disparity for minorities and teenagers. And so here, what we're going to do for the rest of the video is we're going to look at two different FRQs here, right? So this is our first FRQ. What I want you guys to do is just pause the video real quick, right, and answer these two questions. All right, so pause the video and we'll come back and we'll go over this together. All right, so let's go over this. So this is from the 2006 FRQ here. So part A, assume that a significant number of workers are involuntarily changed from full-time to part-time employment. Explain how this will affect the number of people who are officially classified as unemployed. Well, the correct answer here is that there is no change, right? No change in the number of unemployed people, right? And so the reason, right, that there is no change, remember, we have to add the word because, right, because it asks us to explain here, right? There is no change in the number of unemployed because part-time workers are still considered to be employed. So it doesn't matter if you technically got a demotion from going from an full-time worker to a part-time worker, because you still have a job, a part-time job, you're still considered to be employed. And because of that, there is really no change in our unemployment rates. Part B. Assume that the government reduces the level of unemployment compensation. Explain how that affects our natural rate of unemployment. Basically, what this question is trying to say, right, is if the government reduces unemployment benefits, how is that going to impact our natural rate? Well, here, right, our natural rate of unemployment, right, is going to fall, right? Because, remember, we add the word because yet again, it asks us to explain, right? So our natural rate of unemployment is going to fall because people have more of an incentive now to look for work as unemployment compensation diminishes, right? If the government reduces unemployment compensation, if the government reduces unemployment benefits, people are more incentivized to go and look for work. All right. So the next FRQ, right, I broke it up into three different parts, mainly because it's solving an equation type thing, right? So here, the next three sort of questions are from the 2018 FRQ, right? So pause the video real quick, right? Try to solve part A, and then we'll come back here. All right, so let's look at part A. Part A says, calculate the unemployment rate in country X. Show your work. So remember, whenever it says to calculate, you have to show your work here. So here, remember, our unemployment rate is just the number of unemployed divided by the number in the labor force. Or I'm just going to put LF for labor force here. Well, here, right, our unemployment rate, well, we already know who the number of unemployed, right? We have our frictional unemployed, our structural unemployed, and our sickly unemployed. So in other words, right, to get to the number of unemployed, it's just 10,000 plus 5,000 plus the additional 5,000 people that are unemployed, divided by the number in the labor force. Well, remember, our labor force is both the people that are employed and the people who are unemployed. So it's going to be 180,000 plus, right, are 20,000 people that are unemployed here, right? So at the end of the day, right, this should get us to 20,000 divided by 200,000 times 100, which should get us to about 10%. So here, right, the unemployment rate in country X is about 10%. All right, so part B, right, so calculate the labor force participation rate, right, in country X, show your work, right? So pause the video real quick, try to figure out the labor force participation rate. All right, so we're back. So labor force participation rate is just the number of people in the labor force versus the population, right? That's just basically it. And because like we want to get to that rate, right, we're technically going to multiply it by 100 to get to that percentage. So we already know, based on part A, the number of people in our labor force, right? We already know that there are 200,000 people in our labor force, right? We just add together the number of unemployed plus the number of unemployed people. Well, to get to the number of people in the population, we're going to take the number of people in the labor force, the employed plus the unemployed, and add in the number of people that are not in the labor force. So we're going to add 200,000 plus the 100,000 people that are not in the labor force and multiply that by 100. So in other words, right, we're getting to 200,000 divided by 300,000 times 100, right, which would get us to about 66.67%. Right? So the labor force participation rate is going to be 66.67% or 67%. All right, so part C. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the PPC for country X with consumer goods on the horizontal axis and capital goods on the vertical axis. Indicate a point on your graph, label Z, that reflects the current level of unemployment. All right, so pause the video real quick and figure out the answer, and then we'll come back and go over it together. All right, so here we go. So it wants us to draw a PPC, right? So here we have capital goods, right? Just make sure you actually spell out capital goods, but for sake of space, I'm not going to. And then here on the x-axis, we have consumer goods, and we know our PPC looks like this. And so we know for a PPC, right, that there are three different scenarios in which we can exist, right? We can either be right here, which means, remember, if we're inside the curve, we are inefficient, right? That there are high levels of unemployment. If we are on the curve, right, so let's erase that real quick. If we are on the curve, that means we're being efficient. That means we're hitting the natural rate of unemployment. And then lastly, if we're above the curve, right, that probably means we're at 0% unemployment, right, that it's really unattainable at that point. Well, from part A, we calculated, right, that we are at 10% unemployment, right? Just the number of people that are unemployed over the number in the labor force got us to 10% here. So here, our current level of unemployment, 10% no matter where you are, is relatively high. And so here, right, we are going to be right here, within or inside the curve. Right? Because at 10% unemployment, right, that is not within the natural rate of unemployment. And because of that, we are being inefficient. There are lots of people being unemployed, right? And so we are inefficient. So that point is going to be inside the PPC. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys learned a lot. If you guys have any questions, just ask in class or feel free to send me an email. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.